Victoria Ashford had built one of the largest technology companies in the country with the same determination that had carried her through the darkest chapter of her life. At 38, she was admired as a brilliant billionaire CEO whose decisions moved markets and whose name appeared on magazine covers. Yet behind the polished image was a widow who had never truly recovered from losing her husband, Daniel, 7 years earlier. Official reports had declared he drowned in a boating accident during a violent storm. His body was never recovered, and although everyone told Victoria to move on, a part of her heart remained trapped on that lonely lake. Every year, to honor Daniel's generous spirit, Victoria hosted a grand charity gala. The event raised millions for children's education and family shelters. Guests in elegant gowns and tailored suits filled the ballroom, while reporters crowded the entrance hoping to capture photographs of the city's wealthiest donors. Victoria smiled politely for the cameras, but inside she felt the familiar emptiness that always returned on this anniversary. As the speeches ended, she stepped away from the crowd to collect herself. Walking toward the volunteer station, she thanked the men and women serving meals to families invited from local shelters. That was when she saw him. A tall man wearing a simple blue shirt stood quietly beside the serving table, helping a little boy arrange dessert plates. He looked nothing like the wealthy guests surrounding him. His clothes were neat but worn, and his hands carried the rough marks of hard work. The young boy beside him laughed as the man gently wiped frosting from his cheek. Victoria would have walked past without another glance. Then something silver caught the light. Hanging around the man's neck was an old chain with a weathered pendant. Her heart stopped. She knew that necklace. Years ago, she had designed it herself as a first wedding anniversary gift for Daniel. The tiny mountain engraved on the front represented the place where he had proposed. Inside the pendant, hidden beneath a small latch, she had engraved the words, "Forever begins with us." Only one necklace like it had ever existed. Daniel had been wearing it on the day he disappeared. Victoria suddenly felt dizzy. Her breathing grew shallow as memories crashed into her mind, the morning Daniel kissed her goodbye, the frantic phone call about the storm, the endless search boats crossing the lake, and the unbearable silence after authorities announced there was no hope left. How could this stranger possibly have Daniel's necklace? Unable to control herself, Victoria crossed the room. The man looked up with kind brown eyes as she stopped before him. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling despite every effort to stay calm. "Where did you get that necklace?" The man instinctively touched the pendant. "This?" he asked. "I've had it for years. It belonged to my husband." His expression shifted from confusion to concern. "I don't think so," he answered gently. "It was left with my son after his mother died. She told me never to sell it, no matter how difficult life became." Victoria stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible." Before either could say another word, the little boy tugged on the man's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered softly, "are we in trouble?" The man smiled reassuringly at his son before looking back at Victoria. "My name is Ethan Carter," he said quietly. "And I honestly don't know why that necklace means so much to you." Victoria's eyes never left the pendant. Deep inside, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Someone had been hiding the truth about Daniel's death for 7 long years, and this humble single father had unknowingly become the first piece of a mystery that was finally beginning to unravel. Victoria barely slept after the charity gala. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the silver necklace resting against Ethan Carter's chest. It was impossible. She had commissioned the necklace from a master jeweler, and only one had ever been made. Daniel had promised never to take it off. If Ethan possessed it now, someone had to know what really happened 7 years ago. The next morning, Victoria summoned the head of her private investigations team to her office. "I want everything you can find on Ethan Carter," she said, sliding a photograph across the desk. "Employment history, family records, financial records, everything. And keep this completely confidential." The investigator nodded. "You'll have a report within 48 hours. While the investigation began, Ethan returned to his ordinary life. Before sunrise, he dropped 6-year-old Noah off at school and headed to his construction job. The work was exhausting, but it paid enough to cover rent, groceries, and Noah's school supplies. In the evenings, he volunteered at a neighborhood shelter, believing that helping others was the best way to honor the woman he had loved and lost. He couldn't stop thinking about the elegant woman from the gala. Why had she looked at his necklace as if she'd seen a ghost? 2 days later, Victoria received the first report. It surprised her. Ethan had no criminal record, no hidden fortune, and no connection to her company. Everyone who knew him described him as hardworking, honest, and completely devoted to his son. But one detail stood out. There were almost no official records of Ethan's childhood before the age of 10. His birth certificate had been reissued years later. School records were incomplete. Medical files from his early years were missing entirely. It was as though the first decade of his life had simply vanished. Victoria frowned. How does someone just disappear from the system? We're still looking, the investigator replied. But there's more. He handed her another file. Ethan's adoptive parents told neighbors they found him after a terrible accident near a remote lake. They never explained where he came from. Victoria's pulse quickened. A lake. The same kind of place where Daniel had supposedly drowned. Determined to see Ethan again, Victoria visited the neighborhood shelter where he volunteered. She arrived quietly, dressed simply enough not to attract attention. She watched from across the room as Ethan laughed with Noah while serving dinner to families in need. The little boy clung to his father's hand, smiling with complete trust. For the first time, Victoria didn't see a suspect. She saw a good father. When Ethan noticed her, he walked over cautiously. "I had a feeling we'd meet again," he said. "I still have questions." "So do I." Their conversation was interrupted when Noah ran toward them, holding the necklace. "Dad!" he exclaimed. It opened. Ethan looked surprised. It opened. The boy carefully unfolded a tiny piece of yellowed paper hidden inside the pendant. "I've never seen this before," Ethan whispered. Victoria's heart pounded as she stared at the faded note. Whatever was written inside had been hidden for years. And she had a feeling it would change both of their lives forever. Ethan carefully unfolded the tiny piece of yellowed paper, his hands trembling as Victoria watched in silence. The note was fragile with age, its edges worn and brittle. Across the faded page was a short handwritten message. "If you have found this, go to Blackwood Cabin. Trust no one from Ashford Technologies. The truth is waiting." At the bottom was a signature neither of them expected. Daniel. Victoria's knees nearly gave way. She knew Daniel's handwriting better than anyone. Every curve of every letter was unmistakable. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "It's his. It's really his." Ethan stared at the note, unable to understand. "I've never met anyone named Daniel," he said quietly. "Why would he leave this inside my necklace?" Victoria looked at him with the same question burning inside her own heart. The next morning, they drove together to Blackwood Cabin, a secluded wooden house hidden deep in the mountains beside a quiet lake. Victoria hadn't visited it since her honeymoon. Daniel had loved the peaceful place and often escaped there whenever business became overwhelming. The cabin looked abandoned. Dust covered the porch, vines climbed the walls, and the windows were clouded with years of neglect. Inside, everything seemed frozen in time. An old coffee mug still rested on the kitchen table. A faded blanket lay folded across the sofa. It felt as though Daniel had stepped outside for a moment and never returned. While searching the study, Ethan noticed one loose floorboard beneath an old desk. "Victoria," he called softly. "Come look at this." Together they lifted the board and uncovered a small steel lockbox. Victoria entered the 6-digit code that Daniel had once used for every important lock. The box clicked open. Inside were several journals, a bundle of photographs, legal documents, and a flash drive. Victoria opened the first journal. The entries revealed a terrifying secret. Daniel had discovered that several powerful executives inside Ashford Technologies had been secretly stealing millions of dollars through fake companies and fraudulent contracts. They had bribed officials, destroyed evidence, and threatened anyone who tried to expose them. Daniel had gathered proof and planned to reveal everything. His final journal entry stopped Victoria's heart. "If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. Protect Victoria. She must never trust the board until she finds the evidence." Victoria covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "He knew." She whispered. "He knew they were coming for him." Ethan plugged the flash drive into an old laptop they found in the cabin. Hidden files appeared, bank transfers, secret emails, recorded conversations, and signed agreements proving years of corruption. But one final envelope remained. Across the front, Daniel had written, "For Ethan." Confused, Ethan opened it. Inside was an official DNA report. Victoria read the first line aloud, her voice shaking. "Genetic testing confirms a 99.98% probability that Ethan Carter and Daniel Ashford share the same biological father." The room fell silent. Ethan looked at Victoria in disbelief. "That's impossible." Victoria slowly lowered the report. "No," she whispered. "It means Daniel had a brother, one he never knew existed." Suddenly, everything made sense. The missing childhood records. The mysterious necklace. The note. Daniel hadn't left the necklace to a stranger. He had entrusted it to the younger half-brother he had only recently discovered, never imagining that his own death would keep the truth hidden for 7 long years. Victoria and Ethan left Blackwood Cabin carrying more than a box of evidence. They carried the truth Daniel had died trying to protect. The drive home was quiet, each of them struggling to process the incredible discovery. Ethan had spent his entire life believing he had no family. Now he knew he had once had an older brother, a brave man who had sacrificed everything to expose corruption. The following morning, Victoria called an emergency meeting with the company's board of directors. Several executives entered the conference room with confident smiles, assuming it would be another routine meeting. Instead, they found federal investigators waiting alongside Victoria and her legal team. "I know what Daniel discovered," Victoria said calmly, placing the journals and flash drive on the table. "And today, the lies end." The smiles vanished. As investigators displayed financial records, secret emails, and recorded conversations, the guilty executives realized there was no escape. One attempted to leave the room, but federal agents stopped him at the door. Another lowered his head in silence, knowing the years of deception had finally caught up with him. Within hours, arrests were made. News of the corporate scandal spread across television and social media. Ashford Technologies' stock dropped sharply, and reporters surrounded the company's headquarters. Many predicted the business would collapse. Instead, Victoria stood before the press. "My husband believed this company should improve people's lives," she said. "Those who betrayed that vision are gone. From this day forward, Ashford Technologies will operate with complete honesty and transparency." Her confidence reassured employees and investors alike. Though the road ahead would be difficult, the company slowly began to recover. While Victoria fought to rebuild the business, Ethan focused on something far more important: Noah. The little boy noticed the sadness in his father's eyes. "Are you okay, Dad?" Noah asked one evening while they built a model airplane together. Ethan smiled gently. "I just found out I had a brother." Noah's eyes widened. "Really? Where is he?" Ethan looked down at the silver necklace resting in his hand. "He's in heaven," he answered softly. "But he was a very brave man." A few days later, Victoria visited Ethan's modest home carrying a small photo album. "I thought you should have these," she said. Inside were childhood pictures of Daniel, family vacations, birthday celebrations, and photographs of the father Ethan had never known. For hours, they sat together looking through the memories. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they cried. For the first time, Ethan felt connected to a family history that had been stolen from him. Victoria also found healing she never expected. For 7 years, she had secretly believed Daniel might have abandoned her before his disappearance. The unanswered questions had filled her heart with guilt and anger. Now she finally understood. Daniel had never stopped loving her. He had been trying to protect her until his very last breath. As the weeks passed, Victoria grew especially fond of Noah. She attended his school play, cheered at his soccer games, and read bedtime stories whenever Ethan worked late. Watching them together, Ethan realized something remarkable. They weren't trying to replace the people they had lost. They were helping each other build a future that neither had believed was possible. And somewhere deep inside, Daniel's final wish, to protect the people he loved, was finally coming true. 6 months passed, and life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Ashford Technologies had survived the greatest crisis in its history. Under Victoria's leadership, the company became known not only for innovation but also for its commitment to honesty and accountability. New ethical policies were introduced, independent audits became standard practice, and every employee understood that integrity would never again be sacrificed for profit. The scandal that had taken Daniel's life was finally over. Those responsible had been convicted, and the families affected by their crimes received long overdue justice. But for Victoria, the greatest victory had nothing to do with business. It was family. One sunny Saturday morning, she stood in the gardens outside the newly opened Daniel Ashford Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping orphan children find loving homes and providing support to struggling single parents. The foundation reflected everything Daniel had believed in: kindness, second chances, and hope. Dozens of children laughed as they played on the lawns while volunteers organized books, toys, and school supplies. Watching them, Victoria felt a peace she had not experienced in years. Across the garden, Ethan arrived with Noah. The little boy ran toward Victoria with a wide smile. "Miss Victoria," he shouted before throwing his arms around her. Victoria laughed warmly and hugged him back. "I've missed you too." Ethan smiled as he watched them together. Over the past months, Victoria had become an important part of Noah's life. She attended every birthday party, every school event, and every small milestone. Noah no longer saw her as the elegant billionaire from the charity gala. To him, she was simply family. Later that afternoon, the foundation held a quiet dedication ceremony in Daniel's memory. Friends, employees, and community members gathered around a bronze statue engraved with Daniel's favorite words. "True wealth is measured by the lives we lived." Victoria stepped forward to speak. 7 years ago, she began, "I believed I had lost everything. I thought grief was the end of my story. But Daniel left behind something greater than success or fortune. He left behind courage, truth, and a love that continued protecting people even after he was gone." She looked at Ethan. "And he gave me a family I never knew I still had." Ethan lowered his head, deeply moved. Although he and Daniel had never truly known each other, he carried immense pride in calling him his brother. As the ceremony ended, Noah walked over holding the old silver necklace. "Can I ask something?" he said. Victoria knelt beside him. "Of course. Why does everyone smile whenever they look at this necklace?" Victoria gently took the pendant and opened it one last time. Inside, beneath the tiny hidden compartment, Daniel's engraving still shone despite the passing years. "Forever begins with us." She carefully fastened the necklace around Noah's neck. "Because," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, "sometimes love leaves behind more than memories. Sometimes it leaves the truth, waiting for the right people to find it." Noah smiled without fully understanding, but he held the necklace close to his heart. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Victoria, Ethan, and Noah walked side by side through the Foundation's gardens. They could never replace the people they had lost. But together, they had found something just as precious, a future built on truth, forgiveness, and hope. And somewhere, beyond the reach of time, Daniel's final act of love had brought his family home.